Last week, Dak Prescott, Saquon Barkley, Mike Evans, and Pat Freiermuth, those guys totally crushed your week. And the truth is, this happens obviously every single week, but a lot of it is explainable and it can be predicted before the fact. So since I go through the must-start players that I have a lot of conviction on during the week now, I'm going through 5 players today that I believe you need to avoid like the plague in Week 7 fantasy football. So make sure to go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support if you want to see this type of video again. So going down to our first running back here, listen, David Montgomery has been absolutely fantastic in fantasy football this year. Like, just looking back to 1 week ago, he was excellent. He had a 2-touchdown game versus the bad Cowboys defense, and really consistently, he's been like a 15 to 16 fantasy point per game type of guy. Like, his consistency has really been what has separated Dave Montgomery from most other running backs inside of the top 10. And I have Dave Montgomery in a lot of my own personal leagues, but trust me when I say this, I think this is going to be his first down week, and I feel like I could see this one from a mile away. So first of all, the Vikings are extremely tough against running backs in fantasy football. They're second versus running backs in fantasy football. They're also first in rushing yards allowed, so they are not letting anybody run on them. Now, obviously, they had the bye week last week, which kind of makes it a little cheap because the Ravens are second versus the run, and the Ravens haven't had their bye week yet. But point being, the Vikings are really, really hard against the run. And on top of that, as I just said, they're coming off the bye week. So that is obviously going to give their defense plenty of time to rest. They're coming in at home versus the Lions. Oh, totally ready for this team. To me, this is a Jahmyr Gibbs type of week because what you'll see, in my opinion, is Jared Goff gonna be checking the ball down to Jahmyr Gibbs quite a bit. And I just trust Jahmyr Gibbs with his big play upside more than I trust David Montgomery. So really, Dave Montgomery is a touchdown or bust this week. Like, every week, it's really easy to kind of predict him and Derrick Henry to get rushing touchdowns. This one's touchdown or bust. I think this will be his least efficient game this year, and it would not surprise me if he doesn't get in the end zone. I'm betting against Dave Montgomery this week. And going to our next running back right here, a guy that I would love to get on board with, but I simply cannot get on board with Bucky Irving this week. Bucky Irving is taking on the Baltimore Ravens on Monday night in Tampa Bay. Now, if you look at the Vegas line on this one, this would indicate a really high-scoring game. I mean, let's face it, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense has been rolling as of late, and just last week, Bucky Irving and Sean Tucker absolutely ripped apart the New Orleans Saints. So it's like, they looked really good. And that's just the thing, is that he was not alone when Rachaad White was out of that game. It was like, if we would have loved to have seen Bucky Irving handle 25 opportunities in this game. But no, Sean Tucker comes in. He was a really good player. So what happens when you put a split backfield, which, by the way, may be in 3 ways, because Todd Bowles just came out and he said earlier today on Thursday, yeah, we're going to ride the hot hand at running back here. That's not exactly the thing we want to hear if we're looking to get a full workload that's completely unbothered for Bucky Irving this week. It's not going to be like that, man. So what happens when you do that? You have a 3-headed monster potentially backfield against the Ravens defense, who are second in rushing yards allowed, as I was just saying when we were talking about the Vikings matchup for Dave Montgomery, and Baltimore is 6th versus running backs in fantasy football. This is just not a particularly great matchup here for Bucky Irving, and like I said, I wish I could be in on this one. It's not that I like making this type of video, but it's just the reality here is that Bucky Irving is in really bad position. I wish I could be in on this one, but I simply cannot be. Dropping down to our wide receiver right here that I think is a must-sit. I don't care what format you're in. George Pickens versus the New York Jets. So over the last several days, obviously we've had lots of news about Russell Wilson likely being this team's starting quarterback. He's getting all the first team reps in practice this week. If they start Justin Fields, giving him second team reps, they're just dumber than I thought they were. But the Steelers look like they're going to be playing Russell Wilson. So over the last several days, I've been getting a lot of questions centered around, what do you think of George Pickens with Russell Wilson? Is it better than it is with Justin Fields? A lot of people have some renewed hope with George Pickens since he's been going through some struggles lately, obviously. Let me just tell you this. Let me just tell you something. I can promise you, Russell Wilson will be worse for George Pickens than Justin Fields was. And here's why I can tell you that. So, does anybody remember how bad Kenny Pickett was for the Pittsburgh Steelers last year? In the comments, let me know if you remember it, because I am a Steelers fan at heart, but fantasy analysis comes first for me, and I remember firsthand how bad Kenny Pickett was. Kenny Pickett was dead last among starting quarterbacks in adjusted yards per pass attempt. So essentially, every time he threw the ball, he was basically not pushing it down the field. He was playing it really safe at or near the line of scrimmage. You know who was right down there with him at rock bottom last year? Russell Wilson with the Denver Broncos. He can't push the ball down the field anymore. He's not the same player. Everybody understands that, right? So George Pickens, this guy is getting a lot of his production over the years, over the middle of the field, 15, 20 yards down the field. That's just not Russ's game anymore. There's going to be a lot of dinking and dunking with Russell Wilson this week. And on top of that, like if it needs to get any worse, the Jets are 6th versus wide receivers in fantasy football. This is simply just not a good matchup here for a player that's getting frustrated with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think there's an implosion coming soon. That's a little bit, maybe a couple weeks down the line. But this week in particular, I would not play George Pickens under any circumstances. But I'll tell you what I would do in this matchup under every single circumstance is take Aaron Rodgers' projection on underdog and hit the higher because it's at 0.5 total yards. So obviously, if you have not taken advantage of this one on underdog yet, you've got to do it by going down there in the comments, grabbing the link that's there, using code FVEN to sign up for underdog, where not only will they match your first deposit, 50% up to $1,000 in bonus cash, but they'll also give you this sweat-free projection on Aaron Rodgers this week for you to hit the higher on. Dropping down to our quarterback that I really feel like it's a sit, and this one disappoints me too. Jared Goff at the Minnesota Vikings is just not a very good player in my opinion. So again, if we want to look at just over-unders in this game, this is a very high over-under according to Vegas here. So they're expecting a lot of points. I don't think it's actually going to be that point-centric. But what I do know for a fact is that Goff's last 2 games, let's just take those, right? He's been really good in fantasy. But if you actually just look at it from a broader perspective here, Jared Goff is playing the weak Seattle Seahawks defense a couple weeks ago, where not only are they just a weak defense, they've got tons of injuries, and the Dallas Cowboys defense, who also is struggling with their own set of injuries as well, and just isn't very good. This is a much different situation here, going to Minnesota to take on the Vikings off of a bye week. This is not a defense that you want to play around with here, if you have Jared Goff, in my opinion. They're 11th versus quarterbacks here, but again, you factor in that it's a divisional matchup, which historically, all divisional matchups are just harder to predict what's actually going to happen in the actual game. And again, they're coming off the bye week, so they're going to be well rested. They've had plenty of time to prepare for this Detroit Lions game. I think the Vikings are going to come really prepared for this game. And I think that Amon-Ra is also in this group. Like, I think he's going to struggle too. I don't think Amon-Ra is a must-sit by any means, but I definitely feel that Amon-Ra, based on what we've seen with him over the last, several games, is that, he hasn't been as involved and as dominant as he was last year in fantasy. I think this is a matchup that is not particularly great for Jared Goff or Amon-Ra St. Brown. So while, of course, I'm going to tell you to start Amon-Ra because he's typically like a top 5 to 7 wide receiver in fantasy, Jared Goff, there's better options than him this week. I'm just staying away from him and avoiding him like the plague. And our tight end sit of the week right here. It's the same matchup. TJ Hockenson versus the Detroit Lions here. So TJ Hockenson, obviously the hype has been really building, and I'm on board for it, by the way, but the hype has been building because he may very well make his return this week in this game versus the Lions here. Obviously, there's a revenge game narrative to it. It would be awesome to see him come back into this game. He's been limited in practice all week so far, so chances are good like he does make his return to this game. But there's several reasons for us to wait on this particular one right here. I can't get on board with playing TJ Hockenson here because, first of all, this guy did injure his knee. It was not just like a minor knee injury, obviously. He injured it towards the end of last year. So the likelihood that he comes in and handles a full workload like as he normally would before the injury in his first week back is just very, very unlikely. I think that he's going to be very limited in his return to action here. And on top of that, if you look at what the weakness is of the Detroit Lions defense, they're one of the worst teams against wide receivers in fantasy. They're getting tossed all around. Detroit's secondary is the weakness of the entire team. And it's actually going to get a lot worse since they don't have a consistent pass rush without Aiden Hutchinson now. Get well soon, Aiden. But this is the reality here, is that Justin Jefferson is in line for an elite game. Jordan Addison, I think, is in line for a good game as well. Detroit actually is pretty good against tight ends. They're 3rd in fantasy football versus the tight end position. So when you have a limited player coming off a major knee injury versus a top 3 team against tight ends in fantasy, It's just going to be better to wait to see how this one goes in his first game back. And of course, watch the injury report if you have to play him. I just can't see myself not playing a Tucker Kraft over a TJ Hawkinson or a Cade Otton over a TJ Hawkinson this week. TJ Hawkinson very rarely should go in your lineup here, and I just think it should be better to wait and see how this one goes. So let me know how your lineup is looking this week. And if you want to see the must starts for this week that I believe are going to unleash this week in fantasy, click on this video right here.